Greetings, everyone. Greetings. Welcome to another program. This is Dhaiphong. Welcome to another stream. As you can see, I am joined by Scott Ritter, friend of the show, geopolitical analyst, former UN weapons inspector, Marine Corps officer, intelligence officer. It's great to have you back, Scott. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great, thanks. Good to be here. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm all right. It's a little darker over this way because I just had a light go out for my lighting setting. But, you know, the show goes on. And we have a packed show today. And you've been very busy. So let us get started. Everyone who's watching the program, making sure, please like the stream. That would be great. That helps boost the algorithm. Also, be sure to hit the subscribe button, the notifications bell, and of course, find all the ways you can support this channel in the video description. But Scott, I need to get your take on the debacle in Canada, the international scandal at this point. The Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, has walked back any blame for, or has denied any blame for, the celebration of Yaroslav, what was his last name now? Yaroslav Hunka, I believe his name was.
Yeah.
Yes, Yaroslav Hunka. He is former SS Waffen, 14th Division, a first Ukrainian division of the SS. Now, Scott, on Friday, there was a celebration in Parliament after Zelensky's speech, and it was quite clear that Justin Trudeau was not just clapping, and Zelensky was giving the fist pump to this general. Actually, some camera angles looked like he was literally giving the you-know-what signal to Hunka. But also, you know, Anthony Rota, the chairman of Parliament, he has been dismissed. What do you make of this? Give me your opinion, because you've been on this program going over Ukraine's problem with fascists, with Nazis, and now this seems like a pretty big mask-off moment for one of Ukraine's staunchest allies in the collective West. So I'll kick it to you.
Well, I think, first of all, we need to understand that when you speak of the 14th Galatian Division of the Waffen SS, it is a part of Canadian history. I mean, anybody who has studied World War II knows that this division surrendered to the British almost en masse. Instead of being turned over like everybody else to the Soviets to be lined up against the wall and shot as they should have been, they were instead they were sent away to become Canadian residents. So you basically took 14,000 Waffen SS stormtroopers, murderers, rapists, thugs, the most disgusting kind of people in the world. Now, I know there's a lot of they were just warriors. No, they murdered Jews. They shot them. They bayoneted children. I can't prove that this guy did it, but he was a rifleman. So he probably, shot a few Jewish women himself. Probably enjoyed it too, because that's how those Ukrainians are that join the Waffen SS. They're not innocents. These are ideologically motivated thugs. But now they get to go to Canada and live. But it's not just live. I mean, normally one would think that with your history like this, you'd sort of be hiding from it. Where were you in the war, Grandpa? I was, shoveling manure in Ukraine, something like that. But nope. Monuments go up. The 14th Galatian Division, the greatest guys on the planet, good people, staunch people, total rewrite of history. So let's just start off that when somebody says 14th Division, everybody knows what it is, especially people like Chrystia Freeland, who herself is just a dyed-in-the-wool Nazi. We've talked about it. The little Nazi Girl Scout. Her grandfather was an editor for a Nazi paper. She's been apologizing for him ever since, rewriting his history. So she is scum personified, and so is almost everybody of Ukrainian descent in Canada. They come from that background. Again, I'm not saying that just because you're Ukrainian, you're scum, but I'm saying that if your ancestors were Nazis and you glorify their history and you continue to try and whitewash it, then you're scum too. So now this man shows up in Parliament. Now, I've testified before the Canadian Parliament in the past, and I will tell you that there's a vetting process before you get through the doors. So they know who I am. The security guys have me in their system, etc. And when I testified, it was just to the head of a committee. Now imagine the head of state, not just the head of Canada, but the head of Ukraine coming. The vetting that's done there by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, by the Canadian Intelligence Services, everybody in there has gone through a process. You have submitted documents. Somebody has looked at the sheet and looked at your name and go, yep, double check. And as you come in, you're screened, metal detectors, the whole thing. So here comes the Nazi coming in. They knew he was a Nazi. They knew he's from the 14th Division. Why? Because this was a scripted event. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't like Justin was applauding Zelensky and he went, oh, look, there's a 98-year-old guy. I wonder where he came from. What did you do in the war, Grandpa? I was with the 14th Division. The 14th Division. Ah! No. The camera knew where to go. They had the whole history done. This was a scripted event. The guy had been cleared. I think you mentioned that his granddaughter posted a photograph showing him waiting. This is ahead of time, waiting to be greeted by Zelensky and Trudeau. So the idea that this was somehow an accident, a mistake, and remember the day it happened on, Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur. So this is a dude from a division that killed Jews, and they're celebrating him on one of the biggest Jewish holidays. This ain't a good look, but it's not an accident. What it shows is either Justin Trudeau's just a dyed-in-the-wool Nazi. I don't believe that. Or the Canadians have become so inured to the potential of Nazis in Ukraine that they've bought into the absolute stupid notion that they're not Nazis, they're just misunderstood Ukrainian nationalists. Then I'm like, come on, guys, cut them a break. It was a tough time. To be a Ukrainian nationalist, you had no choice but to march alongside Hitler. And if he wanted you to kill a couple Jews, hey, you had to do it in the cause of nationalism because we're Ukrainian nationalists. Our cause comes first. Remember, it was Stepan Bandera himself who said to a Polish courtroom in 1936, when put on charge for murdering a Polish prosecutor, when they said, well, what would you do for the Ukrainian nation? He said, I would kill millions of innocent people for the Ukrainian nation. All right, that's Stepan Bandera. The 14th Division is cut from the same piece of cloth. This was no accident. This is a disgrace. And in any normal democracy, Justin Trudeau would be run out of office. Everybody in there would have been run out of office. It would be a day of national shame. But instead, we're told this is just one giant Russian propaganda event. As if the Russians wrote the script. These Russians are pretty damn good, don't you have to admit, Danny? Because obviously the security guys are going through it. You got Putin going, okay, call now. And the Russian ambassador to Canada, all right, hey, I'm going to distract you while this name goes through here. So you guys, come on. You really think that Russia did this? Russia had anything to do with this? This is an event that writes itself. Russia didn't script this. It's not Russia that's taking advantage. Poland is. They're going to try and extradite this murderous Nazi war criminal. Again, he's 98, and you're like, give him a break, Scott. No, sorry. There is no statute of limitations on murder. And this is the other thing that gets me. I just don't understand this. I'm not Jewish. I think that should be obvious to everybody. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Anglo-Saxon. That doesn't mean I have a problem with Jewish people. I don't. I'm not Jewish, though. But I take people's history seriously. And when the Jewish people say, especially after World War II and the Holocaust, never again, I'm like, well, I have to respect that. They mean never again. And I'm not a master of the English language. I speak Marine, so I fumble it all over the place. But never again. Those are two words that I think I know what the meaning of. And when you put them together, never again, it means it ain't never again going to happen. So why the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, why the Friends of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, why the Yad Vashem Museum, which has documented the murder of thousands of Jews at the hands of the 14th Division, why these people aren't screaming for Justin Trudeau's head on a platter. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that should bring governments down. Why the Jewish nation globally, the people, aren't up in arms about this, because they too have sold their soul for the cause of Ukraine. They've turned a blind eye. Most of them, not all. There's some people speaking up, but Jews in general, in Canada and the United States, have turned a blind eye to the fact that we are literally allowing this hateful, odious ideology to resurrect itself. And the proof of that is when the Canadian Prime Minister, together with the collective Canadian Parliament, stand up and applaud a Nazi murderous thug from Ukraine that everybody knew was a Nazi murderous thug from Ukraine.
Mm. Yes, indeed. And I wanted to actually pull up what you were referencing. So his daughter-in-law, Yaroslav Hunka's daughter-in-law, deleted the photo, and DD Geopolitics was able to capture the screenshot. So there's all kinds of attempts by the collective West as a whole, but especially Justin Trudeau in Canada, to say this was only Anthony Rhoda's fault. He's resigned now. This was a huge mistake. Oops. Right. And then if you don't allow Russia to get one, you're only spreading Russian propaganda if you point out our wrongdoing here. But here is the big problem. By saying that not only did they celebrate this out and out fascist, but they are also attempting to pull the wool over our eyes and say it was some kind of error. But yet here is Teresa Hunka, his daughter-in-law, with the screenshot, very excited. She says, Nato is waiting in the reception hall for Trudeau and Zelensky. He obviously met with Trudeau and Zelensky before the parliament meeting even began. So they obviously knew that he was going to speak, and they knew that he was going to be celebrated. And to think that Rhoda is some lone wolf here is absolutely ridiculous. But Scott, if you could react to this, but not only this, could you tell viewers this long-standing problem Canada and the collective West have had with Ukraine and with this Nazi problem, with this fascism problem? Because this is something that we've been pointing out. And when Putin says denazification, it's that's a lie. That's not right. That's not actually what Russia is doing. And here you have someone being celebrated for fighting against the Russians during the only war where that would be possible, World War II, and the only side that was fighting against the Russians during World War II was the side of fascism. Your thoughts?
Well, I just want to start off by pointing that thanks to that photograph, we now know that he wasn't just in the same room with Trudeau and Zelensky. He physically met them. And anybody out there with a security background or has dealt with, meeting heads of state, you don't get that close unless you've been thoroughly vetted, inside, outside, upside down. So they knew who he was meeting. They knew where they were talking about. This is not an accident. This was done on purpose. And for some reason, they thought that this would be a ho-hum thing because, after all he's guilty of is fighting the Russians. No, he's not guilty of that. Look, one of the problems with Ukrainian nationalism is that it's a very convoluted history. Where do you start? But what we can say is that the end of World War I was sloppy. Between the Brusilov offensive and then the Kerensky offensive, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which created this Ukrainian republic, German occupation, empowering them, breathing life into this notion of Ukrainian nationalism. Where do you draw the lines? You have the Polish-Soviet War, where Red Army troops are driving to Warsaw, the Poles kick them back, they drive to Kiev, they have to stop, and then you get this artificial line drawn on the map that sort of splits the Galatian population, which is an intermixed population of Polish people and Western Ukrainians. And then you have, people like Petrulia, the early Ukrainian nationalist, coming in. He sets the tone for Bandera rising up through the ranks, fighting, because Bandera operated on Polish soil, not Russian Ukrainian soil. But Ukrainian nationalism was born actually in the Galatian region of Poland. Then the Second World War starts. The resentment that the Ukrainian nationalists had towards the Poles and the Polish Jews in particular manifested itself. One only has to take a look at the rape of Lvov that took place in July of 1941, where Bandera's troops ran through that city, slaughtering thousands of Jews. I mean, the photographs of that, it was well documented, and the photographs will turn your stomach. I think everybody should see them, but don't do it on an empty stomach. I think these are things that have to be seen to understand it. If you look in the eyes of the boys chasing down the naked, half-naked Jewish girl that they're getting ready to rape and beat to death, she's already bloodied in the face. Her clothes have been torn off. And you look at the eyes, it's a wolf. It's a pack of wolves going in for the kill. And it's important to see that because this 98-year-old guy was a young guy during that time. And I can guarantee you that his eyes looked that way too. He was chasing down the Jewish girls and raping them and killing them because that's what they did. But the Ukrainian nationalists organized their own units. They carried out horrific crimes on their own. But they also organized into actual German combat units. And one of these units was the 14th Division, the Galatian Division of the Waffen-SS. They did fight, they were involved in combat, but they were also involved in a lot of police actions, going up against partisans and suppressing civilian opposition. And they were very effective at hunting down Jews. 1944 was a very good year for them. They went out in Hungary and elsewhere. They went down and just slaughtered Jews. And when I say slaughter, this isn't indifference. This is a task that they took pleasure in, because the Jews are subhuman. It's the same thing. They take pleasure in killing Poles and killing Russians because they view themselves as the Aryan super race along there with the Germans. At the end of the war, this division, like I said, was surrendered, and rather than be turned over, though, because what happened at the end of the war is, if you remember, if you remember, as if we're that old, but studying your history, yeah, you'll see that Winston Churchill had a huge problem with the Soviets, and especially the rapid expansion of the Soviet army, the Red Army, out of Russian or Soviet territory into Eastern Europe, especially in Poland. And there was a lot of resentment on the part of Winston Churchill. So early on, even as early as 1944, Winston Churchill, as the special operations executive of British intelligence, start to run Polish nationalists and Ukrainian nationalists against the Red Army. And they're actually killing Red Army soldiers. If you go and look at the exchanges between Stalin and Churchill and the Soviets and the British leading up to Yalta and Potsdam, you'll see that Stalin is saying, you guys want me to support this certain Polish dude, but you're funding him, we know this, to kill Red Army, and we've lost Red Army soldiers for this. And I can't support this because there's the blood of Poland has been liberated with the blood of the Red Army, and I can't support somebody who's actively trying to kill Red Army soldiers and is killing them. So the British, from the earliest times, had an issue with this, with the Soviet Union, and so they automatically aligned with. And the British have a history of doing this. They can hold their nose against the stench. They align with people. They believe in the friend, or what is it? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so, so the 14th Division surrenders, and the British take it over. Despite the fact that the Soviets are saying, we want them to come here. These guys have committed huge atrocities, and we need to hold them to account. Nope, they ship them out. Now, they had a history when the Banderas, Stepan Bandera, the organization of Ukrainian nationalists, those kids are running around Lvov raping and beating up women, and they turn around and beat up everybody. When they were being kicked out, about 30 to 40,000 fighters and about 200,000 supporters remained in Western Ukraine. But about 150 to 200,000 fled with Stepan Bandera with the Germans back to Germany, back to Berlin. And then when Berlin fell, these people went over to the West and they became what they called displaced persons, DPs, but not Bandera and not his harshest people, because one of the Germans that fled with him was a guy named Galen, a German general. He ran the intelligence operations in the East, and he organized the Banderas into stay-behind units to carry out intelligence operations, reconnaissance, sabotage, etc. And so he was controlling them. And when he was captured, now the Americans were going up against the wall. Bam! We're going to kill you because you're a Nazi scum pig. And he went, yeah, but I control a network of tens of thousands of people. And the Americans went, really? Well, welcome to the club, boy. Come on in. All's forgiven. Bring in your entire organization, all your little Nazi intelligence thugs. Bring them in, and we'll just wash you, cleanse you with holy water, and you now work for us. Originally, it was the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, and then it became, in 47, the CIA. And so we were using the Banderas and Ukrainian nationalists to communicate with the Banderas that are in Ukraine. So all this is going on. Meanwhile, you got 14,000 Galatian soldiers, and we go, what do we do with them? Well, the Brits said, off to Canada you go. And so they shipped that unit off. They shipped a whole bunch of these Ukrainians from these DP camps throughout in West Germany, or occupied Germany. They shipped them to the United Kingdom, to the United States, to Canada, to Australia. They just dispersed them, and they reinforced an existing Western Ukrainian diaspora of people who had fled, after the First World War. They were sort of normal people, but now these fanatics come in and they take over. You can read books about, especially in Canada, how these OUN guys came in, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists came in, and they just took over through intimidation. They just came in and said, no, we're in charge. We're the ones who will define what Ukrainian national is. We're going to rewrite the history so that everybody looks great. And that's what we're doing. And Canada bought it. This is where you get Chrystia Freeland. She comes from this revisionist approach. This is why in Ellenville, New York, we can have monuments to Stepan Bandera, and people go, well, he's just a Ukrainian nationalist. No, he's a murderous, rapist thug. So is, Shukevich, Roman Shukevich next to him, and the other two. So that's what's happened. Here's the important thing. While these people are being settled in and these diasporas are there, the CIA is running covert operations into Eastern Poland, Western Ukraine, using this organization. And the way the CIA works, I'm not going to give away too many secrets tonight, but they use diasporas. I mean, that's what they do, because the diasporas maintain
clear.
Activity. Yeah. And so they will contact the diasporas and they'll open up communication chains, and then they gather intelligence, and then they train their own little team. They parachute them in, and they parachuted a lot of guys in. They all got captured, because the one thing you can say is, even though Galen had was thinking he was running this organization, the Soviets had infiltrated it and were getting good feedback. But there was some bloody fighting going on from 1944. Because remember, the Red Army took over a lot of this territory in 44, even though the war didn't end until 45. From 44 until, say, 53, 54, so 10-year period, the Red Army and the internal security forces lost about 40 to 50,000 guys in combat, 10 years. It took us 10 years in Vietnam to lose 58,000. And people remember there's some heavy fighting in Vietnam. So it was a serious war. Understand the scope and scale of the fighting that's taking place in Ukraine during this period of time. It's not minor. It's a big deal. Guys hanging out in the woods, running in, slaughtering villages. They killed hundreds of thousands of civilians during this time. Eventually, the Red Army got the upper hand, and around 54, they suppressed this. They arrested a bunch of people. Another 100,000 or so Ukrainian nationalists flee, going into the diaspora, further infecting the mindset of these people. The others, about 100, 200,000, go to the Gulag, where they're locked up. and the key is going to be thrown away, because the Soviets, go back and read the history of the time. They hate the Banderists. They view them as literally the scum of the earth. They know what they are. They've seen them butchered. So many people died in Western Ukraine during the Nazi occupation. Other people fled, that there was nobody to teach. There was nobody to run the education. So the Soviet government brought in Eastern Ukrainians, Russians, ethnic Russians, in to man the schools and do all this. What did the Banderas do? Killed them all. 100,000 of them. 100,000 of them. They killed them. So now they're locked away. 1956, Nikita Khrushchev, because Stalin kicked off a couple years earlier. Khrushchev holds his secret speech, and basically it's denouncing Stalin in the Stalinist period, and it's trying to expose the sins. It's an effort to heal the Soviet people. So he denounces Stalin, and one of his acts was to open up the Gulag and free the political prisoners. So all of the worst people in the world, the Bandera scum that had been arrested, locked up, were now released, and they were allowed to come back into Ukraine and reintegrate into society. And you can say, okay, Scott, but it's not that bad, is it? Well, yes, because remember, the CIA is running the diaspora organization. They're funding it, and they're making connectivity, and there's a collusion between the Nazis and diaspora, the Nazis that were just released from the Gulag, to work their way back up into Ukrainian society. And up they go, all funded by the CIA. The CIA funded this operation up until 1990. In 1990, the decision was made that we no longer needed to fund this because it was sort of on automatic mode and relations are getting good, and we don't need to be doing this whole regime change thing again. But it's not that, it's just that the CIA backed away. We continued to do the funding, but we used other monies to do this, etc. But this is the thing. This is the norm, where in the United States, in Canada, and Great Britain, the Western Ukrainians in diaspora have rewritten their history and published book after book, magazine. One of the Chrystia Freeland's gravest sins is what she did with her grandfather. He was an editor of a newspaper in Krakow that was loyal to the organization Ukrainian Nationalists and the Nazis, and his paper was a pure propaganda piece that actually facilitated the deaths of Jews, encouraged these things, etc. He came over as part of the diaspora, a part of the the wave of immigrants, and integrated in. And she started writing about him later on, and it just total whitewash. He didn't do anything wrong. This was difficult times. That's their whole thing. It was a difficult time. Yeah, but difficult time doesn't justify the murder of Jews, the murder of Poles, the murder of Russians. It ain't a difficult time unless you're the guy doing the murdering. Now we got you. But Canada gives them all a clean bill of health. The United States, nobody questions this. And today, if you dare question this, if you dare raise the facts, you're called a Russian propagandist.
Yeah,
you're called a tool of Putin. But no, we know what the truth is. But what we've done is allow our hatred of Putin and Russia, this Russophobia that's infected society, to blind us to the fact that there are Nazis among us today. Just this summer, there were 2 iterations of the youth camp here in Ellenville, New York. I've seen the photographs, and they're lined up wearing their brown little Nazi uniforms, holding their portraits of Stepan Bandera with their little banners on which are Nazi symbology. Now, well, it's not really Nazi symbology. Yes, it is. That's where they got it from the Nazis, and they've incorporated it as their own. These are sick people, but that illness infects not just Ukraine, but everything around us. Anybody who, I'll put it this way, here's a direct challenge. Anybody who has a Ukrainian flag on their social media, you're a Nazi supporter. You're the scum of the earth. Want to know why? Because you're too stupid to do the research into why you think you support Ukraine. And if you think I'm wrong, I will debate you anywhere, anytime on this issue, because I will crush you, because I have the facts. You don't. And you're stupid because you put the Ukrainian flag up there and you don't know why you do it. Or if you do know why you do it, then you really are a Nazi supporter.
Indeed. And then maybe to tie a bow on this too, journalist Aramate of the Gray Zone, he tweeted, in reference to some of these more maybe Zionist-oriented Jewish organizations that have said something. I don't think they have gone hard on the issue of, hey, the entire Canadian government is probably doing a pretty bad thing here by celebrating this guy. Also, this is not just a Canadian problem, it's the entire collective West. But Aramante posed the question. He was like, well, why is it so infuriating to celebrate this guy, but there's not that same outrage for the fact that these forces are being funded and armed in this conflict right now by Canada, by the United States, by the rest of the NATO countries. So, I think it really is a reflection of not just the historic problem that you have spoken so well on, but also the reality right now in Ukraine, that every time we bring it up, we're just repeating Putin's lie that Russia is denazifying Ukraine.
What kills me is in 2018, the U.S. Congress voted in favor of an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, which was allocating monies to Ukraine to train the Ukrainian armed forces. And that amendment clearly said that U.S. taxpayer dollars cannot be used to fund the Azov Battalion. Why? Well, don't ask me, ask Congress, because they wrote it in the amendment. Because the Azov Battalion is a white supremacist neo-Nazi organization. And a lot of fine Congress members from both parties signed on to this, primarily Democrats, though. But they signed on to it and because they said there's a Nazi problem in Ukraine and we don't want to fund it. Now, in 2022, Marjorie Taylor Greene, I know I hear all the boos and the hisses right now. Okay. But she stood up and she said, why are we sending U.S. taxpayer money to fund Nazis in Ukraine? And she was just shouted down by Jamie Raskin and all these other wonderful Jewish Democratic guys, all of whom supported that amendment, voted in favor of that amendment because there were Nazis in Ukraine. But now they're saying, this is Russian propaganda. There are no Nazis in Ukraine. I mean, they're not even trying to at least show how they, had a come to Jesus moment. They went, oh my God, there are no Nazis in Ukraine. I was wrong the whole time. Nope. One moment, you can't spend U.S. taxpayer dollars because there's Nazi. The next moment, oh, wait a minute, Nazis have become convenient. There are no Nazis. It shows you the intellectual and moral shallowness of these lawmakers because they stand for nothing, literally. They stand for nothing. And they're damn sure not Americans. And I'll say that right to them. Jamie Raskin, you're a traitor, son of a you-know-what. And I hope and pray someday they find you guilty of treason and you go to jail for the rest of your life because you have betrayed your country. You've betrayed the memory of my uncle. Okay, my uncle, who went across Normandy 6 days afterwards, but he went across the beach, worked his way up through France, got into Belgium, got ambushed by the Germans. The 88s opened up, took out his company, killed 250 guys in an instant. They're buried in Luxembourg Cemetery. I've visited the graves with him as he weeps for the loss of his friends. This was in the cause of defeating Nazi Germany. And now we have members of Congress today who lie about there being Nazis in Ukraine, saying there are none. And then they turn around. Remember, the same people that said you can't spend money on Azov in September 2022 invite Azov into the people's house, into Congress. They praise them. Nancy Pelosi says Slava Ukraina as if it's a good thing. Nancy, read your history. In the OUN handbook, the actual handbook, when you join the OUN back in 1943, the handbook sits there and talks about the slogans and why you say it. You say glory to the heroes. You say, glory to Ukraine, and then how to give the salute and all this stuff. 100% Nazi affiliated. And Nancy Pelosi's Slava Ukraina. I mean, she's an idiot. Thank God she's done. But everybody stood there. She should have been fired at that moment. All of Congress should. She held up a banner signed by Nazis. I mean, this is my blood pressure is probably going to go up and I'm going to die of a heart attack before your show is done, but it'll be in a good cause because we need to educate people on this. This isn't an accident, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't a lack of understanding. This is deliberate. It was done deliberately in the Canadian Parliament. I'm telling you right now, they knew they had a Nazi in their midst, but they chose to whitewash it because that's in vogue right now. and it's done in the U.S. Congress. They let these Azov thugs hold a to do an auction for memorabilia, and they're selling the patches from the Azov uniform with the damn Nazi symbols on them. And they're in Congress, the American Congress, they raised $30,000 for a good cause. Good cause. Same cause that had that 90-year-old man 70 years ago jam a bayonet into a pregnant Jewish woman's belly.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, this has been such a mask-off moment for the collective West, for Canada in particular, but really the entire collective West, which has been aiding, abetting, supporting, and empowering these forces, all in the name of attempting and failing to destroy Russia. So speaking of failing, I wanted to maybe move now to the counteroffensive. It seems like the curtain is coming down on the counteroffensive in Ukraine. They're, according to the Russian government, according to Russian side, they're saying that 17,000 troops from Kiev have died this month alone, and the month still not over. There's also reports that finally, 8 months later, 9 months later, Abrams tanks are heading to Ukraine. But so many reports, I think there are multiple reports across the mainstream Western media talking about how this isn't a game changer. There's no one weapon that will be a game changer. Ukrainian intelligence is saying, don't expect these to be used except for special coordinated operations. I thought that the counteroffensive was supposed to be a special coordinated operation, but nonetheless, I wanted to get your take on where things are. Not Ukraine, the UK, similar. The UK is saying that Russia's offensive capabilities are actually minimal right now. But what is the reality here? Some people are saying Russia's on the offensive. They're going to intensify. And there's all of this talk about Abrams and, of course, a lot of talk now on how this counteroffensive is slowing down. Maybe it needs to slow down, and some tension between Ukraine and its NATO backers. So where are things now, Scott?
Well, first of all, we got to back up, put this in perspective, because when you evaluate where we are now, you got to know where we came from. And I'll just give you a quick run through, since we're doing the 2-hour version tonight. So I'll give you. I got a little bit more time, but this conflict started with, of course, this modern iteration of it on February 24th, when the Russians initiated the special military operation. It was done with limited number of troops. I think everybody was surprised that the Russians attempted something of the scope and scale with about 200,000 troops, plus or minus 10,000. As the Russians moved in on Kiev, there's a lot of people talking about, Kiev's going to fall. And I and others are looking at going, but there's like millions of people there, and the Russians are coming down with like 60,000 guys. You don't take a city of several million with 60,000 guys. It doesn't work that way. And it turns out that what the Russians were doing wasn't trying to take Kiev, it was to put pressure on the Ukrainian government to get them to the negotiating table, which they did. 6 days after the special military operation began, Ukraine went to the first negotiation in Gomel, Belarus. They did a total of 3 there. They did another one in Turkey, I think Antalya, or it could be another city, but the Lavrov met with his Ukrainian counterpart. They initialed an agreed upon settlement for a ceasefire, went back, got it vetted, and they were supposed to meet on 1 April and end the war. That was what Russia's objective was. It wasn't to conquer Ukraine. And how do we know? Because the document clearly says that if you sign this, Russia will withdraw from all territories that were occupied after February 24th. Imagine that. They're not out for territory acquisition. They just wanted Ukraine not to be part of NATO. Number one thing in the thing, you won't be part of NATO. The Russians were not, they didn't have too many demands on demilitarization at that time. They denazification. They weren't going to touch. They just no NATO. That's all they wanted. They on the issue of the Donbass, Lugansk and Donetsk. Basically, the document said, look, they declared their independence before the special military operation began. We can't touch that. This is a sovereignty issue. What we'll do, however, is we'll get the Russian troops out of there. We'll bring it over to the international community, and in accordance with United Nations principles of, of self-determination, there will be a referendum, and the people of this area, Ukrainian, Russians alike, will vote and decide: do they want to be part of Ukraine, part of Russia, or independent? On Crimea, they said that'll always be Russian. You're never getting that back, but we're willing to work with you so that the Ukrainian government has some sort of say in what goes on inside Crimea towards Ukrainians, people who identify as Ukrainians. So, we're going to respect that and give them some sort of autonomy. They talked about security guarantees, the whole thing. Imagine if the Ukraine had signed that today, where they'd be. They wouldn't have lost any territories. 400,000 guys would be alive. 20 million people wouldn't be displaced. $1 trillion worth of infrastructure. The whole works. But no, NATO told them no. So now at that point, Russia's special military operation had to change. Remember, they shifted into phase 2. Phase 2 was basically the recapture of the Donbass. To do that, they also had to take the land bridge, Kherson, Zaporizhia, for logistics and sustainability, but they hadn't integrated that yet, meaning that once they secured the Donbass and they probably would have withdrawn from those territories too. But NATO throws in tens of billions of dollars, US $45 billion Lend-Lease package, if you remember that, in the May. And they rebuild the Ukrainian army, which had been devastated by this action. 246,000 active duty troops were gutted by this. So we rebuild it. We launch a counterattack. And remember, during this time, part of the good faith measure that the Russians did as part of the ceasefire was to withdraw their troops from Kiev, withdraw their troops from Sumy. And in Kharkov, they started the process of withdrawal in anticipation of an agreement being signed. And they took half of the troops out. So you have a sparsely defended line in Kharkov. And this new rebuilt army comes sweeping in and pushes them back to their current defensive positions. The Russians still have a problem. They started with 200,000 guys. They suffered some casualties, thousands of dead, thousands of wounded. How to reinforce now? So Russia makes a decision in September, October to mobilize 300,000 reservists, mobilized, partial mobilization. They also opened the doors for volunteers. Another 300,000 Russians volunteered. They also did a couple ways of conscription during this time. A certain percentage of those conscripts signed contracts, so about 80,000. So we're per time. So we're looking at 160, 300, 760,000 new troops, fresh troops coming in addition to rotated troops. So you got a little bit less than 1 million Russian soldiers getting ready, getting organized, but it takes time. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians are building up this new army to do something. Now, normally in the military, you like to keep your enemy guessing. That's a big deal. That's why we have classification, top secret, secret, things of that nature. But General Zaluzhny, the head of the Ukrainian forces, he has an interview with The Economist, and he does other interviews in December, and he says, I can beat these guys, meaning the Russians, but I need a lot of equipment. I need 300 tanks, 500 infantry fighting vehicles, 500 artillery pieces, unlimited ammunition. And he said, and with this, and here's the fun part, with this, we can capture Melitopol. So he named the objective to sever the land bridge so we can start to put pressure on Crimea. Now, this is where the Russians go, Melitopol. Look at a map. And you examine the map and you go, wow, the ideal line of communication is from this village called Robotyno, and then you go up to Tokmak, and then you go to Melitopol. So there's their axis of advance announced by Zaluzhny. So the Russians begin to build defenses, but it's not just any defense, because now they know. And remember, Zaluzhny defined the size of the force, basically 9 to 12 brigades. So they know the size of the force. They know the composition, Leopard tanks, Marder infantry vehicles, Strikers, Challengers, the whole thing. They know it all. They know who's doing it because this is a press event now. They're interviewing the soldiers in January as they're being trained in Grafenwohr. I'm from the 36th Brigade and we're training with this. I'm from the 47th. I'm the fighting 47th. We're the 82nd. We're going to sing a song to Stepan Bandera. This kind of thing going on. When the Russians went in 2022, the 58th Combined Arms Army coming out of southern Russia, they're the ones who helped move out of Crimea do the land bridge, get up to Mariupol and all this. Their deputy commander was named is a lieutenant general named Alexander Romanchuk, and he got pulled out of the lines and sent to the Combined Arms Academy to take some of his combat experience and use that to train up the next generation. But he was also tasked with taking a look, reimagining Russian defensive warfare doctrine, which they had inherited from the Soviets. They had modified it, but now within the scope and scale of this new defensive posture that Russia was taking after the Ukrainian counteroffensive of September, October, he said, reimagine it. And he did. And he wrote a paper. He published a paper in March of this year. And then they read the paper and said, that's a good paper. Guess what, Lieutenant General Alexander Romanchuk? You're leaving the Combined Arms Academy and you're going to Zaporizhia. And remember how Zaluzny told us exactly where he's going to attack from? We want you to build up the defenses here. So take your new doctrine. We know where they're coming. We know how many troops they have. We know what the composition of it is. And we want you to build a defensive barrier to defeat this counteroffensive. And he did. And they did some interesting things here. Because, I mean, first you got to put yourself in the mind. The whole idea of defensive warfare is to try and you do intelligence preparation of the battlefield. You look at the terrain and see, what terrain is advantageous to you, how you want to use that terrain to shape the battle, to divert the flow of enemy forces, etc. But you also have to get the enemy to do what you want them to do. The 42nd Guards Motorized Rifle Division out of Chechnya, actually, it's a Russian unit but based in Chechnya, that participated in this war. They had a tough early fight. The 70th Regiment lost their commander. The 291st got beat up. And these units were pulled out and sent to the front lines in Zaporizhia because it was sort of a quiet sector after a while. And right about the village of Robotyno, remember, they know where they're coming. They took the 291st and the 70th. They put them right there where the Ukrainians are going to attack. Now, why would you do that? Because you know that Western intelligence is looking at this, and they have the order of battle data. They have the write-up of how it's performed, morale, and all that stuff. Both these units took casualties. Both received mobilized troops to bring them up to speed. And so some intelligence officer, probably like me, is looking at it going, whoa, look, guys. They took the 291st and the 70th. They put them side by side in Robotyno. There's a seam there where there's not going to be effective command and control. And these mobilized troops don't want to be there. So when we put pressure on them, they're going to run away. And everyone went, yeah, that's what's going to happen. So they trained them up, they got them in, and they went up against the 291st and the 90th on June 4th, and they got slaughtered. Because what had happened is the Russian had lured them in to right where they wanted. They created the concept of weakness to attract that attack, and then they slaughtered them. And they've been slaughtering them ever since. And now what's happened as the Ukrainians commit to Robotyno because they need it. So that battle, which should have taken about 3 days, really, because it's in the crumple zone. The Russians aren't supposed to fight and die. There's no Alamo mentality in Romanchuk's defensive doctrine. So they're sucking them in. The Russians are supposed to delay, pull back to a defensive position, delay, pull back. But instead, what would happen is they're killing so many of them that they would counterattack and recapture and force the Ukrainians to fight the same battle over and over and over again. So what should have been a 3-day battle for Robotyno ended up dragging on for more than 2 months. The Ukrainians commit forces. It's 12 brigades, and they're going to work in 4 waves of 3 brigades. So 3 brigades attack. They are supposed to get up to the first defensive line and pierce it. You're going to lose steam. You're going to lose combat efficiency because you're going to take casualties. 3 more brigades come through, do a passage of line, penetrate the first defensive barrier, and push on to the second, where, again, they're going to lose steam. You take casualties, but they're going to expand the breach. 3 more brigades come in, and they're supposed to punch through and get to Tokmak and poise for Melitopol. And then the final 3 brigades, your elite forces, go racing through, capture Melitopol, the war is over. Well, in September, the final 3 brigades were thrown into the battle to take Robotyno. And they did, because the Russians gave. There was nothing left. But now the Russians, Robotyno's on the low ground. The Russians go back to the high ground. So they took Robotyno. Now they're just getting a snot pound of them. They can't go anywhere. They're stuck. They can't go up the high ground. So what do? They shift to the left. shift north towards Verobovoy. I'm sure I'm butchering the name, but it's a road leading from Obatino there on the low ground. And they shift there and they start to attack in that direction because that's what the Russians wanted them to do. They're sucking them in, and it's also leading them away from Tokmak. So it's extending their line. They're getting slaughtered, and that's where we're at right now. There is no combat strength. These 31 tanks, these Abram tanks, understand that the way the war is being fought today with the weaponry and everything, you don't come in with 31 tanks in a massed attack. The tanks right now are operating in pairs, sometimes in trios, sometimes four. They come in, they move up, they do some fire support to advance infantry fighting vehicles, which dislodge infantry, who then move forward and gain a piece of terrain, drive the Russians out, hold on to it, take a pounding with artillery. If they can hold on to it long enough, they consolidate, and then they do it again. Tanks move in, fire support, etc. So these Abrams tanks will probably be, parceled out just like the Challengers, 2 here, 2 there. But what do we? Just like the Leopards, 2 here, 2 there. Well, the Leopards got slaughtered. The Challengers are getting slaughtered, and the Abrams will be slaughtered. They're not good tanks. These are old tanks. They're heavy. They're coming at the worst possible time. You should have introduced the Abrams late spring when you had the whole summer of dry terrain to maneuver on. But they're coming in right at the beginning of the Rasputitsa season, the muddy season. These are heavy tanks. They're going to bog down, and it's just going to be ugly. This counteroffensive is over. And the thing about the Russians is, now this has been heavy fighting. I think we need to understand that when Vladimir Putin talks about Ukrainian casualties, he admits it's about a 10-to-1 casualty ratio. 10 for every 10 Ukrainians, there's 1 Russian. He said a while ago 71,000 Ukrainian casualties, which means there's 7,100 Russian casualties minimum. That's a lot of Russian casualties. The Russians have rotated in some of their reserves. I've been watching as they take these new regiments that they of mobilized troops, and I've seen at least 2 get committed in the 42nd Division's theater, area of operations, subordinated to the 42nd, which means they're rotating out the 291st to 70th to get them back there, get them up to strength, and then go into reserve. But they haven't committed the bulk of about 200,000 Russian reserves that are trained, organized, ready to rock. They haven't been committed. The Ukrainians are out of everything. They don't have anything left. Yeah, 31 Abrams. That's it. They threw in their last elite brigades to try and take Robotyno and shift over. They're done now. There's no oomph left in this thing. The counteroffensive is over. And it's been a strategic defeat for the Ukrainians, for the collective West. And I think what we're going to see now is that the Russians, having absorbed the Ukrainian blow, are going to slowly go on the counteroffensive and begin to put pressure on the Ukrainians. The idea is you attack here, force Ukrainians to send reserves over there. Now, remember, the Russians have 200,000 reserves they can send in, so they can plus up troops here, attack. Ukrainians don't have anybody left, so they're going to have to steal troops, rob Peter to pay Paul, send troops up to fill that gap. And the Russians are monitoring that. And they say, well, they're thin here. Let's hit here. Now they break through. They have to steal more units. The Ukrainians come in to seal that break. But that means there's a weak spot up here. The Russians then will attack there. The Russians will be on the initiative from now on. And eventually the Ukrainian line is going to collapse, and they're probably going to have to retreat beyond the Dnieper River and surrender a whole bunch of territory to the Russians. That's the direction this thing's going. And I just think that, the Ukrainians have suffered a strategic defeat, and that means the collective West has suffered a strategic defeat. A lot of people talking now about a frozen war. That's what they want. They want to freeze the war. Why in God's name would Russia freeze the war? A frozen war implies we need to catch our breath. Russia doesn't need to catch their breath. Russia has been doing everything right. They've been absorbing everything that NATO and Ukraine was throwing at them without suffering heavy casualties. I mean, they've suffered significant casualties, but nothing like the Ukrainians. Combat units that suffer between 50 and 69% casualties become combat ineffective. The vast majority of the Ukrainian brigades that have been committed to this counteroffensive become combat ineffective, which means they had to be pulled back, and they have to suck resources that could have otherwise been used to create a new reserve force, suck them in to get those units back up to speed. We've seen brigades being rotated out 3 to 4 times during this counteroffensive, which means 3 to 4 times this brigade's about 4,000 or 5,000 guys, has suffered between 50 and 70% casualties. Do the math. That's a lot of casualties. The Russians, on the other hand, they've had some units take some hits. They've rotated them out, but they have fresh, intact units to come in and plug those holes, and they still have a whole bunch of those fresh units to use as they see fit. And that's the direction right now. War is an extension of politics by other means. And I've always said that while the Russians will defeat the Ukrainian army, this war won't end until you have a political solution. And I always believe that what would happen is first the Ukrainian army would be destroyed, and then you'd see the collapse of the Ukrainian government. But things are looking like maybe the collapse of the Ukrainian government may come first. I don't know. Did you see the interview that Zelensky's wife gave recently?
Yes. Do you? I have the clip of the very last question. It's only about a minute. Maybe we should play it because I think
it's a good time to play it. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's incredibly. I think it's incredibly telling of where things are in the conflict. Let me find
and politically.
Yes, politically. So here it is. Here's Face the Nation. All right, I'm not for copyright purposes. I won't max screen it, but let's play the video. This is just I have it fast forwarded to the very last question where she's going to ask about what she would think about her husband, Vladimir Zelensky, running in 2024, which, mind you, I just want to point out to the audience, this is something the United States is pressuring. This is not necessarily something Zelensky is saying, oh, we should have elections. That's, given the behavior of the Ukrainian government, I think it's quite clear that with all the opposition parties banned, that they don't want to have elections. Zelensky doesn't want them, but the U.S. has been pressuring this slowly but surely, especially in the last several months. So here we go.
President Zelensky and your family have become synonymous with Ukraine. When people in America think of Ukraine, they think of President Zelensky and your family. How would you feel about him running again in 2024 if elections are held?
Це дуже складне для мене
Well, this is
запитання.
a very difficult
Знаєте,
question for me.
я не була прихильницею його.
Even when he ran for the first time, I didn't fully endorse it. But if he runs again, if he runs for the second time, if he decides that it is necessary, well, we have some experience. We've been there. It is not as scary as it was in the first time. I don't know whether he has made this decision or not. It will depend on the situation in our country and the situation and the possibility of organizing free and fair elections. It will also depend on whether our society would need him as a president. If he will feel that Ukrainian society will no longer wish him to be the president, he will probably not run. But I will support him, whatever decision he takes.
Whatever decision. Madam.
So,
look, how many wartime leaders? Could you imagine? There's only been one in my experience, and that was Lyndon Johnson, who refused to run for a second term during the Vietnam War. And the main reason is because he realized the United States was losing in Vietnam, and he didn't. He had been lied to by McNamara, and he had lost all confidence in his ability to go forward. But generally speaking, wartime leaders are like, rally around me. I'm the guy. Boom. Winston Churchill, running for election during the Second World War, kept winning. She sounded defeated, and this is the point. Zelensky is a defeated politician right now. Look, they have this major divorce taking place with Poland right now, which is huge. Nobody's really talking about it, but it's a deal. You see the Western European countries starting to say, we got nothing left for you. Europe is fractured. Even in the United States, we have our entire budget being held hostage by Ukraine. That's going to lead to some sort of crisis unless a solution is found to this. But his days are done. And so what I think we're going to see sooner rather than later is we're going to see political collapse before we see military collapse. That's just a guess. And I think the Russians are looking at that, and they're thinking this, if they agree, let's say if the Russians have a similar assessment, then they're not going to go pedal to the metal militarily, because sacrifice thousands of lives when you can get accomplished what you want to accomplish simply by putting a little bit of pressure on and waiting for Zelensky to fall. If they thought Zelensky was a dug in, a wartime leader, impossible to evict politically, then you'd see the Russians taking more risks, I think, on the battlefield now that they've crushed the Ukrainian counteroffensive. But I think that we're probably going to see the Russians. There will be no frozen conflict. I mean, Lavrov and Putin have made that clear that Russia, and there won't be a negotiated settlement. That has flown as well. What there will be is unconditional surrender. And that unconditional surrender will happen when Zelensky is removed, because he is an impediment to the conclusion of this conflict. He's no longer part of the solution. He's purely the problem. And, how he's removed is yet to be seen. I think for the sake of his wife and his kids, I'd like him to resign and flee the country. If he tries to hold on too long, I think he could find himself on the receiving end of the fury of Ukrainian officers who feel betrayed by his incompetence, especially when it becomes clear just how corrupt he is and how corrupt his government is. There's a growing, everybody knows it's there, but there's a growing resentment over this. There are people who aren't getting their pensions paid, people who aren't getting the health care they need because of the corruption. The United States is fully funding. There's the irony. Here in the United States, we have people who can't get health care. We have infrastructure problems. We have education problems, the whole thing. But in Ukraine, we're funding the entire country. We're paying every salary in the civil service. We're paying every salary in the military. We're funding the health care. We're funding their veterans affairs. We're funding we're paying the Nazi salaries. And as an American, I take umbrage at this. I'm like, wait a minute. If you're going to do that there, first do it here. Let's take care of the immigration problem. Let's take care of the dirty water up in Flint, Michigan. Let's take care of the homeless problem. Let's take care of all those junkies on the street in San Francisco and Los Angeles. Let's take care of America before we start taking care of Ukraine. It's going to become a political problem. And I think Zelensky sees the writing on the wall, and that's why his wife, that was not a happy woman answering that question. Everybody can read the body language for themselves, but that's not a woman that was overly confident in what the future held for her and her husband.
No, and there was something very strange about the timing of the question. It was the very conclusion of the interview. It was not it was one of the more difficult questions of the interview. The whole piece is a puff piece for her and Ukraine. It's all about how Russia is doing all these terrible things to kids, and she's a mother, and it's all this kind of painting Ukraine in this very human light. And then the very last question is basically, I think, almost as the mainstream media does, almost like this reflection of what the United States foreign policy establishment is thinking right now. They have been talking about elections in Ukraine. They've been talking about Ukraine cleaning up its corruption. And they haven't been too happy with Zelensky. Last time you were on this program, Scott, you said that, Zelensky is someone the collective West needs, the United States needs. They built him up. They made him into who he is. They promoted this image of Zelensky. We all remember when he was in Congress the first time, he was celebrated. The flag was there. You were talking about all the signatures and the shouting of the fascist slogan, Slava Ukraini, all of that was going on. And he got all this money. And then he comes around this time during the UN General Assembly and then goes to DC afterward. And the mood is a lot different. He didn't even get to speak at a joint session of Congress. It was closed doors. And Congress is still fighting over the money, and they're claiming now that it's part of this bigger fight over the budget, which happens all the time, maybe a government freeze, all of this stuff in the United States. But I think the fact that there is a fight over it shows that things have changed. Since the last time we spoke, Scott, how have you been seeing this change in the temperament of the collective West towards Zelensky and the Ukraine conflict as a whole? It seems to be there's a cooling mood over it.
Well, yeah, I think we talked right around the Vilnius summit. Was that around about the time?
Yes, I think it was right after that.
Yeah, and I said at that time that was the high water mark of Zelensky. That was it. He had peaked, and it was all downhill from there. And you could just tell. I mean, even in Vilnius, the way they treated him, the way they isolated him, he's a man who has outlived his usefulness. He was, somebody who was handpicked to be brought in. I mean, if you take a look at his TV show, Servant of the People, take a look who funded it, the timing of it in relation to the building him up as a presidential candidate to replace Poroshenko. You see the hidden hand of Western intelligence there, primarily MI6, but the CIA as well. And we know this. I mean, again, Scott, there's a lot of speculation taking place there, isn't there? Well, I don't know. What was one of the most famous sayings that Zelensky had early on this conflict? The first poster that came out. I know it's on the tip of my tongue. I don't need a ride. I need ammunition. Do you remember that? I don't need a ride. I need ammunition. Because somebody had dared say, why doesn't the CIA get him out so he can go live in his mansion in Miami? I don't need a ride. I need ammunition. All over headlines. I mean, and that was the beginning of the Zelensky war guy, tough guy. Now he's wearing all his.
He's out there. He's in the fatigues. He comes to Congress in the fatigues. People are saying get a damn suit, but he's in his armored fatigues. Yeah.
I mean, I tried to tell him, Zelensky, green only counts when you have the Eagle Globe and Anchor on it, pal. Otherwise, you're just a fake, and he is a fraud. But the point is, they built him up. But then the truth came out. Somebody asked, hey, we've been looking all over for when was this speech made? When did he make this statement? Do you have it on recording? Is there something here? And finally, a statement came out of the U.S. Embassy. Well, Zelensky actually didn't say that. That was a statement made by a CIA official attached to the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. Oh, so the CIA is scripting everything. Yes, now you've broken the code. Zelensky is literally an actor. He's an actor playing a part. There's no original thought in that poor little man's mind. He's reading script after script after script. And you know what happens? I mean, everybody's seen it when you watch a good TV series. The first season's outstanding. Then they go into the second season, you're going, what the hell happened to the writing?
Especially these days in the era of streaming, especially with all of these programs, it's like one season good, and then the rest.
You're like, who's doing the writing? Well, the problem is you couldn't sustain. This wasn't like Servant of the People. I think got 5 seasons out of it. They're having trouble. They had a good first season. Zelensky had a good first season. He really did. Hell, he won an Oscar. I mean, just ask Sean Penn. He won an Oscar. I mean, so yeah. But
Sean Penn wants to melt the rest of his for ammunition. Ukraine certainly needs it. But
the second season, it's not going well. The poor writing and everything. So, you know what happens when the season starts to fall? You got to kill off some people. You got to bring in new blood. And I think Zelensky is going to be killed off. Literally, maybe, but at a minimum, he's just going to disappear, and they're going to bring in somebody else, because this is all grotesque theater of the absurd. Every aspect, from the Canadian Parliament, which was a scripted event, up until, again, the whole thing about bad writing is you don't realize it's bad writing until you actually air the episode, and all the critics go, what the hell was that? And suddenly everybody just wakes up and goes, wow, that was really bad writing. Well, why didn't you review that in the lead up to everything about this script is bad from the count? Why? Again, to show you that why it's this PR running this. No military professional would ever broadcast the counteroffensive the way the Ukrainians did. They literally scripted exactly what they're doing. Literally scripted, and the Russians went, thank you very much. And they built this defensive line, and now everybody's surprised. The Russians have built a very extensive defense. You told them where you're going to attack, man. They
just read The Economist. That's all they had to do. Read The Economist, read the Wall Street Journal.
And you told them when you're going to attack, and you told them with what kind of forces you're going to attack. Not only that, you told them what tactics you're going to use. Miley, I think in May, goes to Germany, and he's there, and it was hilarious because you read the article. Undisclosed military training base in an undisclosed NATO country because we have to protect the operational security. Miley, well, we're out here doing combined arms training. We're taking U.S. doctrine, and we're bringing it together in a training package so that the Ukrainians can use combined arms training in their attack. They're going to revamp their tactics to use NATO tactics. And the Russians are going, rewind that. Thank you very much. Guys, pull out NATO tactics, combined arms training. Okay, let's revamp our defenses. They literally told the Ukrainians everything. They might as well have handed the operational plan to the Russians and said, this is what's going to happen. That's why they got their butts kicked. This is poorly written theater. Horribly written. They're trying to score points by they released all this because they have to convince you and me and the rest of the Western audience that there's really going to be a counteroffensive. Because people were starting to say, why are we sending all that money there? What's the purpose of this again? I mean, there was that whole battle of Bakhmut. Everybody's forgotten about that. The meat grinder, 70,000 dead Ukrainians, grinding them up. Why are they doing it? People are starting to get a little, no. Hey, our ratings are going down, screenwriter. What do we got to do? Let's reintroduce, episode 10, the counteroffensive. The general approaches the desk. He looks at the reporter with a very stern look, and he says, we're going to launch a counteroffensive. And then you have to write and tell everybody what the counter, because this is theater. You don't fight a war this way, but that's exactly what's happening. Everything the West does is spin. It's spin. It's tragic spin because there's a lot of people dying, mostly Ukrainian. But it's not war. It's not military art. And frankly speaking, everybody in NATO involved in this, everybody in the U.S. military, should be relieved for incompetence. If the U.S. Army threw American lives away this callously, they would be hauled before Congress, and they'd probably get some sort of subpoena for criminal negligence. Yeah, it would be the end of their.
And the American public themselves would be a scandal. I mean, the number of casualties in Iraq, Afghanistan, these places paled in comparison to what's happening
in World War
II.
Ukraine. In the Battle of Tarawa, the Marines had a very bad day. Their amphibious vessels they had a mistake about the tides, and they thought they were going to be able to take their amphibious craft right into the shore, and instead they got stuck on reefs about a mile out, and the Marines had to wade in chest high water, a mile of water, getting machine gunned down by the Japanese. There's no cover. You just got to keep walking, and you're either going to live or you're going to die. You don't get a choice. The Japanese machine gunner gets to decide that. The photographs of the bodies bobbing in the wall, piled up on the sand, were prohibited to be published to the American people at the time. And indeed, the Marines were told, you can't have another battle like this, or else Congress is just going to say, what the hell's going on? Because already Congress is asking the question, why did you lose so many guys for this tiny little island? How did you go about losing this many people? Nobody wanted to talk about it. But, and that's just a couple thousand Marines. Imagine going to Congress and saying, because Congress is going, hey, we gave you all that money. You guys built up four armies. Where are they? Well, 8 to 9 out of every 10 guys that we train are dead or wounded now. That's again, I'm not making that up. The military commissar of Poltava gave a statement. He said, out of every 100 guys that have been mobilized in Poltava, 80 to 90 of them are either dead or wounded. That's 80 to 90% casualty rate. Remember earlier I said 50 to 69% make combat ineffective. 80 to 90 means you ain't around anymore. You got nothing. So they're just, if this went up to the U.S. Congress, in World War II, they had on the European theater, the 36th Division, I think, was a Texas National Guard division. And they were getting ready to launch an attack across a river, the Rapino River or something in Italy. And the bombers came in. They were supposed to hit the Nazis on the other side. They greased their bombs early, and they blew the little snot out of the 36th Division, killed a whole bunch of Texans. All the Texan congressmen were screaming for blood, as they should be, incompetence like that. Now imagine having an American general hauled before Congress, and they said, what happened? Well, we got beat. Why? The Russians were better trained, better equipped than us. What do you mean? What do you mean better trained? How long does it normally take to train a soldier to do a combat breaching operation? Well, sir, by the time we do basic training, advanced training, about 2.5 years. And how long did you train the soldiers for this combat breaching operation? About 2.5 months. So you took soldiers, gave them 2.5 months training for a 2.5-year project, and you threw them into battle. Yes, sir, that's about it. But they were competent, right? I mean, at least they had good fundamental skills. Oh, no, sir, only 3 weeks of training. Well, how long does it take to train a Marine, a basic training? 13 weeks, sir. And Ukrainians, you gave them 3 weeks. Oh, yes, sir. And then you put them into equipment. Now, they were familiar with the Leopard tank, right? Oh, no, sir, they've never dealt with a Leopard tank before. How long does it take to train a Leopard tank operator? Well, sir, it takes about a year and a half to get a good Leopard crew up to speed. And how much time did you give the Ukrainians? Sir, we gave them 3 to 5 weeks. Do you see where I'm going with this, Danny? Mm-hmm. If this was an American explaining the deaths of American soldiers to U.S. Congress this way, they'd all be arrested, as they should be, criminally negligent. But now, because these are just Ukrainians, we don't care about you. This is the thing that everybody has to understand. What I just told you proves we don't care about Ukraine. We don't. If we did, we would never let this happen. We are simply using Ukraine as a vehicle to bring pain to Russia. That's it. We're willing, as Lindsey Graham said, to fight to the last Ukrainian. And that is sickening. You know, we talked about that 90-year-old Nazi and what he did during the war. You do understand that Americans are guilty of a crime that is larger than the crime that he and his Nazi colleagues committed. They killed, 100,000 Poles, 200,000 Russians, 40,000 Jews. We've killed 400,000 Ukrainian soldiers. We did it, not the Russians. Don't blame the Russians. We're the ones that led them to undertake the most complicated military operation imaginable, the breach of a heavily defended position. And we said, do this, and we didn't train them right. We didn't equip them right. We didn't prepare them. They were totally unprepared for this. And we said, go forward. And then we have the audacity halfway through it, after they've lost 71,000 guys. You heard people say, well, those Ukrainians are just casualty averse. What? You can say what you want about the Ukrainians, and I'm very critical of again, especially the leadership that has embraced Nazi ideology, etc. But the Ukrainian soldiers, even the ones with minimal training, big brass balls to do what they're doing. I challenge anybody in your audience right now, just if you get into a vehicle and drive to certain death. And if you make it, get out of the vehicle and keep advancing. These Ukrainians are courageous. And be the Russians. Imagine the Russian getting the snot pounded out by artillery, holding your position, not withdrawing, so that you can lay waste to the Ukrainians coming in. Both sides are staffed with some of the bravest soldiers imagined. I think I told you the story, but I'll just tell it one more time, about the Battle of Bakhmut, where the Wagner troops surrounded about 20 Ukrainian soldiers in a basement. They said, surrender, brothers, surrender. We'll treat you well. We'll feed you. You'll go home, all that stuff. And what did the Ukrainians say? Russians don't surrender. And they fought to the death. They didn't say Ukrainians don't surrender. They said Russians don't surrender. Why? Because they're trained in the history and lore of the Soviet Union, of the Red Army, etc. And that's something that came out of World War I and World War II, where Russian soldiers were surrounded by the Germans and told to surrender. And they said Russians don't surrender, and they fought to the death. This war is about Slavs fighting Slavs, brothers fighting brothers, cousins fighting cousins. This is the saddest kind of war imaginable. In America, we talk about the American Civil War. This is that kind of fight taking place right now. And the tragedy is, the Russians do generally, they genuinely care about the Ukrainians. You just see video after video of Russian soldiers going in, taking care of the wounded, evacuating. There's a new sick video out where the Russians actually came in and picked up the Ukrainians that were abandoned by their own side. They treat them, give them first aid, and they start to evacuate them. There's a Ukrainian drone overhead watching this. And as the Russians start to evacuate, the Ukrainian drone calls in Ukrainian artillery fire to kill the Russians who were rescuing wounded Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are, their leadership scum. The Russians actually treat the Ukrainians with respect. They capture them, they feed them, they give them first aid. There's a whole video of, and I know a lot of this is propaganda, but it's still sincere. they invite the families to come in and visit the prisoners of war. So the girlfriends, the wives, the mothers all get to come and visit their sons, their husbands, their relatives in prison. I mean, this is tragic. The Russians care more about the Ukrainians than we do.
Yeah, and I think what's even more sick about this too is, as we were talking about earlier, that there's a script being written for Zelensky and for Ukraine's so-called leadership, and it almost feels like now, as we were talking about, the seasons, or this current season is just poorly written. It almost feels like at this very moment there really isn't much of a script left, and you have Zelensky kind of lashing out at the mouth, and there's a lot of, it seems like there's a lot more tension here, and at the same time that there's this tension between basically his masters and himself, there's also this change in the narrative, which to me is even more heinous, and underscores a lot of what you're saying here in terms of the difference between how the Ukraine's government, how NATO, how the United States are treating Ukrainians as compared to Russia. Now they're talking about a long war of attrition. This, mind you, for months and months and months, all of the people who have pay attention to this stuff with a not maybe a non-neocon mentality have been talking about Russia fighting a war of attrition. Now the collective West is saying, oh no, this is a war of attrition and we need to fight this till the end. And you have Alexei Arestovich talking about 2035. I mean, will there be any Ukraine left if that's the case? This is the leadership. This is basically all the leaders of this project now talking in this manner of, yeah, we'll just permanently do this to Ukraine. It'll just happen on and on and on and on, and we won't change our tune. We'll just continue to throw them out there until we can't any longer.
Look, the it takes two to tango. I mean, first of all, I always find it funny that the West talks about a frozen thing, a negotiated ceasefire, etc. But isn't it Zelensky that had his parliament pass a law that prohibits any talk of negotiation? And the Russians keep saying, you guys want us to negotiate, but I mean, you might want to talk to Zelensky to get the parliament to repeal the law that says he can't negotiate. But the Russians have made it clear, and again, they throw the words back of the West. Early on, Stoltenberg and others were saying that because the Russians don't want to negotiate, this is a war that will be decided on the battlefield. On the battlefield. Okay, well, and now they're going negotiating, and the Russians are going, no, I like that other thing you were saying. It's decided on the battlefield, because that's where it's going to be decided. There will be no negotiation. First of all, who are they going to negotiate with? They tried it with the Ukrainians, the same ones that are there right now. They lied. Remember, Zelensky actually negotiated a treaty that was ready, a ceasefire agreement that could have brought an end to this war. The Germans and the French lied to the Russians about the Minsk Accords. There's a sham just to buy time to build up the Ukrainian army. Why are they going to believe them again? America's lied about everything we've ever done with Russia. Who are the Russians going to trust on this one? There's no one to trust. And if you can't trust, then you can't have negotiations. Plus, the Russians have made it clear that they have objectives that they're non-negotiable. And the Ukrainians have put forward just such unrealistic positions. I mean, the Russians had to withdraw to 1991 borders. Isn't going to happen. The Russians have to turn over their government to the International Criminal Court to be tried as war criminals. That ain't going to happen. The Russians have to pay reparations. That's not going to happen. It's stupid. It's if I could sit down and write demands to my town council and go to the town council meeting. I need you to dissolve the police department and give me all that money so I can build a golf course in my backyard. Well, that's not going to happen, Scott. Well, we're not going to have a settlement here until that happens. That's one of my conditions. Well, Scott, that's totally unrealistic. But nobody's telling Zelensky. Well, actually, everybody told Zelensky. Remember, there was that peace summit they had in Saudi Arabia where like 30 nations came together, and Zelensky went, send his guys down there, and they're like, here's our 10-point peace plan, total surrender by the Russians. And everybody else went, that ain't going to happen. You're so far off base. The Russians right now are in unconditional surrender mode. I mean, listen to Lavrov, listen to Putin, listen to everybody that speaks on this. There will be no negotiation. Ukraine will have to, agree to very specific things. But the sooner Ukraine agrees to it, the sooner this war can end, and the more territory Ukraine will have. Ukraine will never get Kherson back, never get Zaporizhia back, never get Lugansk back, never get Donetsk back. They will definitely never get Crimea back. But right now they can hold on to everything else. But if they continue this conflict and it goes on, if the Russians do push forward and start forcing the Ukrainians into this precipitous retreat, the Russians could very well end up having Kharkov, Sumy, Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv, probably swing over, take Odessa, drive up to Transnistria, which means that entire Black Sea coast will be denied to the Ukrainians going forward. And once the Russians take it, at this juncture, I don't think they'd be giving it back. Again, not a Russian, they get to make their own minds, but the Russians have made it clear that when Russian blood gets spilled on soil, it becomes Russian soil. And if the Ukrainians want to continue this fight and compel Russia to expend lives to take historically Russian cities like Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkov, Sumy, majority population, Russian populations, they're never going to give them back. Again, I hearken people to listen to Vladimir Putin's speeches, 2005 presentation, I believe, given in April. The one where he said that one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union, and everybody jumped in and went, see, that old Putin, he just wants to bring the Soviet Union back. But they didn't listen to the rest of the speech where he said, because overnight tens of millions of Russians became homeless. I am the president of the Russian nation. The Russian nation isn't defined by the borders of the Russian Federation. It's defined by the location of the Russian people, people who have common culture, heritage, religion, language. And the people of Eastern Ukraine are, in the minds of Putin, part of the Russian nation. That doesn't mean that he wants to take them. Remember, in March, Russia was willing to give back these territories to Ukraine, but he just wants that the Ukrainian government treats the Russian population with respect, allows them to speak their language, worship the way they want to, etc. The Ukrainians are the one who committed, basically ethnic and cultural genocide against the Russians. So the Russians aren't going to yield on any of this. And once they take Russian territory, territory that's populated by a majority Russian population, I don't see a situation where they give it back. Not at this stage of the game.
Yeah, and I think perhaps on this last subject, so we don't keep you too long, Scott, as it's already getting late, I wanted to ask your reaction. I don't know if you saw Seymour Hersh's latest report on Nord Stream. He's claiming that the source that he's been in communication with and through his own research all indicate that the Biden administration was planning on blowing up Nord Stream prior to the Ukraine conflict beginning, and that the reason for this was that the United States wanted to essentially force Germany off of Russian gas, Russian LNG, because there was concerns that Germany wouldn't comply with this pressure that the United States is placing on Germany and the entire so-called Eurozone over the course of the last several years, and especially since this conflict began. So I want to know your take, because right now the Eurozone is in projected negative growth territory. Germany's already in a recession. A lot of talks about deindustrialization and a long economic crisis for Germany in particular. And also you have Europe at the same time that this is happening, targeting China now and attempting to seemingly do the same thing that they did with Russia in its relationship to China. This $900 billion the EU has in terms of a trade relationship with China, they are now, with leadership like Emmanuel Macron, going after China and saying that they are going to, for national security purposes, start to clamp down on particular industries, electric vehicles, high technology, similar to the United States. What do you make of all this? It feels like... I mean, there's often this term, or this phrase, shooting yourself in the foot. This feels a lot worse than that. This feels like what happens when you self-emulate.
Look, I mean, there's two separate things. Well, let's start with the first part of your question, Seymour Hersh's article. I don't. I mean, I just spoke here tonight, so I think anybody can see that I agree with the conclusion that was drawn from the article that Ukraine has lost the war. I mean, there's two hours. He did the one about Ukraine losing war. Now I did the one about Nord Stream as well. I've known Seymour Hersh for 25 years. We're good friends. I respect his reporting. He's a man of great integrity, etc. And if he quotes a source, I'm sure he's vetted the source. The problem I have is he seems to be working off of a single source. There should be more, but whatever. His sources say things, but then they say things like, well, Putin's a thug, the Russian, the illegal Russian invasion. And I go on and I say, well, wait a minute, that's not reality. That's not, if you interview an intelligence analyst, they're going to give you a better answer than that. This is a politicized person. And if he's getting it wrong about the initiation of this conflict and what's going on, I have to reserve judgment on his conclusions as well. Even if I agree with the conclusion, I have to question how he got to that conclusion, because a broken clock is right twice a day, but the rest of the time it's wrong. And so, again, I have to withhold judgment. I'm just saying that normally when Seymour Hersh writes something, I just jump right on board and I go, boom. But lately he's been quoting people who have a fundamental misunderstanding of the reality of Russia and Vladimir Putin. And I'm somebody who believes that you can't solve a problem unless you first, have defined the problem properly. And if you're starting off with the definition of the Ukraine problem by getting Russia wrong, what does that tell you about everything else you're getting wrong as well? And so I'm holding judgment. Again, let me just say that Seymour Hersh is a man of tremendous experience with a track record that's, it's unmatched. He has the highest integrity and the highest degree of standards, and he's probably vetted the hell out of this. And probably there's a reason why he can't quote additional sources, etc. But the fact that the source he quotes gets it fundamentally wrong about Russia is problematic to me. Now, when we get to the second part of your question, which was, because it is late and I'm getting tired, so my brain just did a quick erase. What was the second part after?
It really is about the conclusions that the United States was pressuring Germany to get off of Russian LNG, and now it seems like Europe is doing the same with China. But there's this problem that Europe is right now seemingly self-emulating, essentially and primarily because of its behavior.
Well, what's interesting, you saw, did you see that GOP ad that came out, that ridiculous GOP ad about, their math is hilarious. We've spent 5% of our budget and we've destroyed 50% of the Russian army in Ukraine. So this is a reason why. And I'm like, 5% of the budget? I thought the budget was around 800 billion, and we've admitted to spending 113 billion. I may be a Marine and my math isn't my biggest thing, but 113 billion out of 800 is more than 5% of 800 billion. So your math's a little off. 50% of the Russian army. It's 900,000 troops at the start of the war. It's up to about 1.5 million right now. 50% would be between 450,000 and 750,000. Really? You've destroyed that many, right? The math is totally off. But what it got at is what we're doing in Ukraine is so important because it sends a message to China. And if I were the Chinese going, well, what message are you sending me again? That your military sucks, that your defense industry sucks, that sanctions hurt you more than they do the nation you target, that you're destroying yourselves, as you say, self-immolation, and Russia's come out stronger. I'll take some of that. Look at Germany. The Chinese premier, or remember, van der Leyen and then the German Schultz, and not Schultz, but the foreign minister went to China and with their big trade delegations. And a key aspect of this is what they call de-risking. That's the new buzz phrase. It means delinking, but you're not allowed to say that because you don't want to scare the Chinese off, because the Chinese are stupid. I mean, we saw the Ukrainians say those Indians and Chinese, they have low intellectual capacity. So the Chinese are really stupid people. So they don't see through you when you say, we just want to de-risk. What does de-risking mean? Well, de-risking, it's okay. It's not a bad thing. It's not like we're delinking. No, the Chinese know exactly what's going on. Remember, they're the dominant economic power in the world for a reason, because they do this better than anybody else. So they're sitting there with the Germans, and the Germans are saying, well, we need to de-risk. And the Chinese are going, well, could you check your balance sheets for a second? We have, but we just want you to check them. How are you guys doing on the domestic side of your business? Oh, you're losing money everywhere. It's like red. A lot of red, right? A lot of red. So basically, if you de-linked from us, de-risked, we don't de-link, you'd just be losing money. You go out of business, right? So the only main money-making venture that you have is the joint relationship you have here. And you want to de-risk it? And the German guys go, ooh. They go back to their boss, say, boss, we can't. The only money-making thing we got is our relationship with China. We don't need to de-risk. We don't need to minimize. We need to double down, because the only way we can revive our domestic economic fortunes is by making more money. And the only place we're making money is in China. That's the reality of it. And this is the stupidity of Europe. They are literally slitting their own throats, shooting themselves in the feet, pouring gas. Have you seen that movie? I think it was Zoolander. At the beginning. All right. So Derek Zoolander's out there with his beautiful models, and they're at the gas station, and they're spraying gasoline all around. And then one of them lights a cigarette and they all die. That's Europe right now. I'm looking at Europe, and I'm just going, oh, the beginning of Zoolander, because that's what they're doing. They're literally a bunch of, pretty little models running around there, spraying themselves with gasoline, and they're going to light a cigarette and kill everybody. Stupidity in the extreme. Europe is a joke right now. It's a tragic joke, because Germany used to be literally the economy upon which the European Union was built is the German economy. The conservative German banks set the standard for, monetary policy and things of that nature to make the euro a strong currency. Well, the German economy is in collapse. Deindustrialization is taking place at a pace that's unimaginable. The French aren't far behind. The British, likewise. The Italians are in trouble. There's not a single place in Europe that's doing well. Not a single place. And it comes down to the decisions made to, sanction Russia, which have backfired, to decouple from Russian energy. Dumb move. And it's going to get dumber. I got to reemphasize this point. For all that Europe's done to Russia, you do know that Russia continues to sell energy to Europe. Mm-hmm. Now, why? Well, they make some money. But the main reason why is because the Russians actually honor their contracts. They're an energy provider. They don't walk away from their contracts. But the Russians are the most ethical businessmen in Europe today, because they're living up to their contractual obligations, while Europe is just pulling out everything, stealing money, doing everything wrong. If Russia treated Europe the way Europe treats Russia, Europe would be already 6 feet underground. They'd be done. That's not what the Russians are doing. The Chinese are also likewise very patient people. I mean, the Chinese are like having a very good babysitter dealing with, the most ill-behaved children. A giant kindergarten class full of ill-behaved children. And the Chinese are like trying to, okay, time to take a nap, everybody. Time to eat. We're going to organize everybody. Get you guys cleaned up. Billy, stop fighting over there. The Chinese are when I say Billy, stop fighting, who the hell made peace in the Middle East? Well, it wasn't America. It wasn't Europe. It was the Chinese, of all people, came in and said, Iran, Saudi Arabia, sit down, make good. This is like a really good daycare center, running of all the little children, making them all work together. The Chinese, are they perfect? No, nobody's perfect. But the Chinese have a successful model that the West hasn't been able to mirror. Europe can't. Again, it's just an amazing how it was the come to Jesus moment for German auto industries. where they were saying, decouple, delink, 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 and we can't. If we stop selling cars in China, we don't make any money. We have to go out of business. And already German industries are fleeing Germany because they can't afford the energy prices. And the German government just came down with a news flash last week. They won't be able to subsidize energy costs for the population this winter. So the entire country is going bankrupt. I pray for the European people that we have another mild winter, because if there's a cold winter, they're in a lot of trouble. It's literally, I just had an interesting conversation with a Russian of Armenian descent about what's going on in Azerbaijan and with Armenia and Azerbaijan. And I don't think everybody realizes that we're like this close to having a major regional war, not between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but between Iran and Turkey over something called the Zangezur corridor. It connects as a southern corridor, a stretch of land that I think it's the name of the province area, but it connects Nakhchivan, which is Azerbaijani territory that is linked with Turkey, with the rest of Azerbaijan. It's Armenian, it's part of southern Armenia, and the Turks and the Armenians want to basically take over that land and link up there, because now the Turks will be able to have a sort of a new Silk Road connecting Turkey through Azerbaijan into Central Asia, and have that connectivity. Meanwhile, the Russians had signed a deal with the Iranians for a northern corridor coming down from Russia, working its way down through the southern Caucasus, through Armenia, through the Zangezur corridor into Iran and down the Chabahar, which gives you a port into the Indian Ocean. And a lot of money has been put into that. And so the Iranians have said, if you guys shut down the Zanzibar corridor, we're going to war. And the Turks and the Azeris are going, well, we're going to shut it down. So the Iranians are moving troops up there. Things are happening. The only nation that can stop this is China. Why? Because both corridors China benefits from. I mean, China's already been building up the Chinese-Pakistani economic corridor that comes down and it goes to the port of Gwadar. I might be saying that wrong, but again, another port on the Indian Ocean. They've been building that up. Gwadar is supposed to have connectivity with Chabahar. If it gets that connectivity, the Russians can dumb down Chabahar to Gwadar, go in, and now you have this wonderful connectivity taking place. Chinese would also like to be able to tap into going into Turkey and up into Greece and into the rest. So the Chinese are looking at that going, this war would suck because it basically cuts off both corridors. So the Chinese, it's not America the world's turning to anymore to say, hey, could you resolve this issue? Could Americans come in, be the adults in the room? It's the Chinese. So is there a lot to criticize China about? I'm sure, Danny, you and I could spend all day digging through the books and go, aha, oh, gotcha. But the point is, that would be like a sentence here, a paragraph there in a 1,000,000-page book. But the 1,000,000-page book is like the Chinese are kicking some serious ass. I mean, they're doing it right. It's not perfect, but they're doing it right. And I'll leave it this last one. It's just one of the greatest ironies since you brought up China. Biden at the G20 signed off on something called the India Middle East Economic.
Right. I was going to bring up your article about this because I saw that you published yours. I'll pull it up and I'm going to put it in the chat because I wanted to ask you about, because this all has a lot to do with Europe too. The Belt and Road Forum is coming up next month. And this corridor has been touted as the alternative to Chinese influence, which what they really mean is China's Belt and Road Initiative.
Right.
But there's some interesting complexities here I've gone over in this program, but your article does a really good job in going over in depth these complexities. So I'll kick it back to you, though.
No, I just want to point out that, the idea is that it starts in Mumbai, in that area, and then you're supposed to get connectivity to the Middle East. So from Mumbai, you'll go in and you'll hook up in probably Dubai. And those are both developed ports. But now to get from Dubai into Europe, you have to go by train. Now, what people don't realize is that for the last couple decades, there have been rail lines built throughout Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. There's been some talk about building a one that connects all of the Gulf Coast the GCC nations, but they can't cooperate. So it's falling apart. But the United Arab Emirates has a nice train system. Saudi Arabia has a nice train system. And this corridor talks about building on these train systems as a counter to the Belts and Roads Initiative, except that these rail lines are all built by the Chinese as part of the Belts and Roads Initiative. So in order to make this corridor work, they have to piggyback on the Chinese Belts and Roads. And you know who's going to upgrade the trains? Because they're saying, well, these trains have to be upgraded and all this. Chinese companies will. They got the contracts. So Joe Biden is going to take billions of American dollars to pour it into the development of this thing. And who's he going to be paying? The Chinese to build the rail lines that he needs. The Chinese are going, okay, yeah, we'll do that. Now, here's the beauty of it. It goes through Saudi Arabia, up into Jordan, then across into Israel. Whole another level of complexity, whether or not this is ever really going to happen. But the port that they're going to come out in is Haifa. Haifa is going to be the gateway to Europe. Well, gosh, that sounds good, except, wait a minute, Haifa. Why is it such a big port? Oh, yeah, that $1.7 billion port construction and modernization done by the Chinese as part of the Belts and Roads Initiative. That's okay. Forget about that. Because now they're going to load up all these cargo containers onto ships in this nice Chinese-built port, and they're going to sail to Greece, to the port of, and I'm going to Piraeus or something like that. But it just so happens that that port, Greece's largest port, is that way because the Chinese built it as part of the Belts and Roads Initiative. So this whole concept of a corridor to counter the Chinese Belts and Roads Initiative is nothing more than Joe Biden piggybacking on the Belts and Roads Initiative. How stupid can you be? And the answer is about as stupid as Joe Biden.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like the Belt and Road Initiative has basically laid the roots of this corridor. And if we know anything about, and you mentioned this in the article, the G7's big promise back during its last summit, not much happens. And I know Pepe Escobar has done a lot of work about how there's a lot of these projects that generally get announced, and the United States in particular doesn't usually put, and especially in the collective West, they don't really put much into this. Now I think they're trying to, Saudi Arabia and India, they're trying to massage them and try to maybe have them shoulder some of the burden, but it does feel pretty, you use the word complex. I guess we could also say suspect. We're a lot of question marks as to what actually will happen, what can happen, and the Belt and Road Forum is next month. We don't have a date yet. Putin will be there. 110 countries will have representatives there, probably more by the time it happens. It just it feels like the game is lost. Yeah.
And again, going to this India Middle East economic corridor, what people need to understand is it's just a memorandum of understanding. It's nothing. Nothing. There's nothing there. Literally, it's a bunch of nations getting together going, wow, what sounds cool? Why don't we build a port? Why don't we go from Mumbai to Dubai? That sounds pretty cool. So that would be India to the Middle East. Wow. Then what? Well, why don't we build a train that connects the Middle East to Europe through Israel? That sounds really cool. Why don't we do that? Let's write it up. How do we do this? We don't know. Is there any basic fundamental agreement on this? No. All right. Well, what we'll do is we'll say that nobody's politically committed to this, but we have 60 days to get together to work out the details. Well, sounds good, guys. Let me tell you this. The details will never be worked out. This will never happen. It won't get off the starting blocks because, first of all, it requires Saudi Arabia and Israel to make good. And there's the whole issue of Palestine there that's problematic. Also, Saudi Arabia just made good with Iran. And Saudi Arabia is just joining BRICS. And Saudi Arabia is leaning towards the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Iran has joined both. The future of Saudi Arabia, money-wise, is all in that direction. They're going to throw it all away to make good with Israel because Joe Biden wants them to make good with Israel. And remember, it's Joe Biden that said, I will never shake the hands of Mohammed bin Salman because of his, the murder of Khashoggi. But he went crawling there 2 summers ago to beg for lower oil prices. And the Saudis said, no, we're not going to do that. And they continue to say, no, they weren't going to do that. There's a lot of pie in the sky going on right now. A lot of, if I didn't know better, I think that, Joe fell in on Hunter's cash and got a little high when he came up with this, because there's nothing realistic about this, nothing at all. I mean, to begin with, to pay China to build infrastructure that's designed to counter the Chinese infrastructure development program. It makes no sense. So I would bet money, if I were in Vegas, I'd find an odds maker and I would bet money that this India Middle East economic corridor never happens, never gets off the ground.
Yeah, it certainly does not look good at all. But with that said, Scott, I've kept you for a while today, and so I definitely want to let you go. I want to I have some announcements to get to, but I appreciate you coming on as always. A good friend of the show. Please let people know where they can find you, and I did put your article in the chat box here so they can check out. I'll do it again because I think they should read. This is a very interesting topic. I don't think it's one that gets a lot of coverage at all, but it's important when these grand projects to counter Chinese influence come out, that people really know what the United States and Europe are really up to when they're attempting these things. But back to you, Scott.
No, again, thank you very much for having me. I think we're going to see each other again soon with some sort of cool little roundtable thing, or is that?
Yeah, if you're available, October 4th, I would love to get together with you,
I sent
Garland.
you an email that said, "Yeah, I'm good for that." I'm
okay.
up for that.
Okay, cool. So yeah, if Garland is good, then yeah, because you all have been having great conversations. Andre has been someone I've been following in that space for a while, and his experience is just, I mean, it's everywhere, and it's,
No, it'd be great because you'll get Garland, who's a very well-spoken man. You get a Marine who mumbles English, and then you get Andre that just speaks with the greatest Russian accent in the history of Russian.
Yeah, with the Soviet, the Russian history, the Soviet history, and also the U.S. history, because he also spent extensive time here. Yeah,
he's an absolute treasure trove of knowledge, and I enjoy both of them. I enjoy you. I think it would be a great roundtable. So yeah, we have that to look forward to.
Cool.
If people are interested in things I write and any podcasts that I'm on, including my own, you can go to scottritterextra.com. My Substack is there. You can subscribe to it. The subscription is free, but if anybody thought that this might be something they'd like to support, you can always do a paid subscription. I am in the process of making a documentary, Waging Peace, that's designed to sort of be an antidote, a vaccine to Russophobia. Its premise is, disarmament, and I tell it through the story of my 26-day, 12-city tour of Russia that took place in May. Documentaries aren't cheap. They don't happen out of nothing. So if anybody was interested in helping fund this, there's wagingpeace.fund. You can go there as well. But generally speaking, nothing on scottritterextra.com is hidden behind a paywall. It's all there. And so if you want to read what I write and listen to podcasts, including this one, when you send me the link, I'll put that up there. That's where you go.
Cool. Great, Scott. Thanks so much. Yeah, and October 4th, I think that will be somewhere around this time, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. I believe that's the time I was aiming for. I think Andre has confirmed, and now we just need Garland to confirm. So hopefully we'll see each other in about a week or so. And
I'll make Garland an offer he can't refuse. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, and next Warrior update, you have to, give him a stern answer your email. No, I'll follow up. But thanks so much, Scott. Appreciate it. Have a good rest of your evening. Get some good rest. I certainly need it. And take good care.
Thanks for having me on.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, everybody. All right. So yeah, you heard Scott spilled the tea on the roundtable. So before I go to Vietnam, I'm actually trying to organize more than a few roundtables. Brian Berletic, the Duran, I believe I'm going to try to have on October 2nd. And then October 4th, Scott Ritter, Garland Nixon, Andrei Martyanov. Before I go to Vietnam, so, we kind of begin October, right? And go into a long break with lots of good content. But with that said, everybody, just a few announcements, okay? First, before I go, it's 10:30. I'm going to go as very soon, 5-10 minutes tops. I just want to run through some announcements. So next planned stream actually is October 1st with Richard Medhurst. So I'm going to collaborate with him on this channel. I think we're going 5 p.m. Eastern time, 11 p.m. Vienna, where he is located. Save that date. And then October 2nd and October 4th. Those are the planned streams. I don't know if I'm going to do one before then. I have a lot of planning to do for some other things. Let's see. But I will keep you all updated. That's the channel business. Other business, of course, just to make some plugs here. As you can see, my lighting is much worse today. So yesterday I had an audio issue where I have to replace my mic interface. And today I had some lighting issues. I have to get now more lighting. So, this channel does have costs to it. And in order to meet the labor costs, because I have a person who does help me with some things from DD Geopolitics, a great help, as well as the equipment and all of this takes money. And so if you are able to support, I would highly encourage you subscribing on Patreon, patreon.com/Danny Dhaiphong. There's yearly options. You get to suggest guests, ask questions of guests. You get to suggest content. You also get exclusive posts, although I don't really put anything behind a paywall, but things like audio, things like early notifications, things like continuous updates, news reports, things like that go on Patreon. Substack is also an option. YouTube membership is also an option at $4.99 per month. Similar perks, but those have a little bit limited or more limited in terms of bandwidth. Substack has great archives of my articles, but all of these ways you can support are available on a regular basis. And then for one-time options, buy me a coffee, PayPal, those are the best ways. You can find that in the video description as well. And I really do appreciate all of the support that you provide, whether it is through free support like liking and sharing and all that good stuff, or whether you can contribute paid memberships. So with that said, everybody, that's the plugs. That's what I had in terms of announcements. So keep abreast of this channel. Oh, no. Before I go, I almost did this again. I'm being terrible. Whenever I get a new platform, I am not good at promoting. That's on me, but also it's just a hard thing to do when you're a one-man operation. So I am now on Rumble, okay? So I'm putting that in the chat description. Follow me on Rumble. I need to build up my Rumble follower base because you never know. I'm not here to forecast or foreshadow that things are going to get tough on here for me, that maybe I won't be here one day. But I'm going to every stream promote at the end, especially when more people are on, to follow me on Rumble just to make sure all my stuff is going to be backed up there. I'm streaming right now on there. Be sure to follow me on Rumble. That is the best place, okay? And that is the best place to have a backup of what I do. And also, it is an upcoming platform. It is one that is not censoring based on content, etc. Essentially, that is the platform right now that is doing the most, I think, to support subscribers. But there's also Rockfin. You can find me, search my name on Rockfin, and I appreciate my Rockfin community who is here. So be sure to follow me on Rumble. Be sure to follow me on Rockfin. That's where all my stuff is backed up. Rockfin is a little different. I don't back up all my video. I can't back up all my videos so easily there, but every stream goes up on there, which is essentially all of my content anyway. All right. So it was a great conversation with Scott today. It was great to be with all of you today. One last time before I leave, please do like the stream, hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel, hit that notifications bell. We've reached hundreds of thousands of subscribers here. It is truly an honor to do this work in service of not just all of you, but of course in service of this larger goal of genuine peace with justice. That's what this is all about. And before you go, or maybe after you go, do consider becoming a paid member on Patreon or Substack or YouTube, or giving a one-time donation on Buy Me a Coffee, PayPal, and the like. Find all that in the video description. It all goes back to this channel. It all goes back to this work. It all goes back to growing, and that's what we're trying to do here. That's what I'm trying to do here, trying to grow this channel so that this message, these politics, these ideas, and of course, this truth becomes more prominent as things really heat up in the world, as the world changes dramatically. We need to stand on the right side of history, and we need information that will help us do that. So I'm going to go now. Thanks so much, everybody. I will see you all again soon. Thanks for all the super chats. Thank you to, I'm not going to read the comments today, but thanks to Candace Strike, Nobody, Golden Silence, Twice. Thanks so much for your generosity today in the super chats. And I will see you all again. The latest October 1st. If there's something that needs to be discussed, I will try to jump on earlier. But October 1st, 2nd, and 4th should be a kind of a packed week of streaming, a packed period of streaming. And so I will see you all at the latest then. Take good care, and I will see you all again soon. Bye-bye.